Gardak the Charred. Sired by a war chief, failed by his oldest son, Gardak has lived in his brother's shadow for years before rising to great prominence. And although he was surrounded by fearful respect from both the fighters and the magic users of his tribe, Gardak remained unsatisfied with being the first in command among only the shamans of the herd. Having a mind, the lords of Blackwood would not be ashamed of Gardak kept his thirst for even more power secret until a perfect opportunity. Having been brought a vision of his brother's demise at the hands of a young Ravencrag fury, instead of warning him, he told him a tale of glory and destiny that would await the chief if he crossed blades with the barbaric warrior. And so, with his younger brother's assurances, Chief Gardel went to his death. Short after the crippling defeat that left his tribe leaderless, and being sure that some of the most able warriors had fallen at the Gardel's side, Gardak immediately seized possession of the chief, and to prove that a shaman may be as ferocious and able to lead the beastman into battle as any hunter or warrior, he started gathering forces to launch a devastating attack on the lands under the Frost Valley's protection. The Brigand Chief. Nobody really knows where or when Malgar was born, but most believe he spent his early years in the northern part of the Valskir, in a village long since wiped out by the beastmen or brigands. Most probably sold into slavery as a child, he was one of the few youngsters who managed to survive long enough to win their freedom by spilling blood or proving too useful to a Blackwood lord or a crafty Goran war chief. Malgar most certainly did not belong to the latter category, as when he finally let himself be known to the shieldbearers of Frost Valley Keep, it was not due to his intellect, but because of his cruelty and brutality rivaling those of the fierce beastmen blood hunters. And although some of the expeditions meant to bring Malgar to justice were overseen by the Lord Commander himself, the Brigand Chief managed to fight his way out of every trap and finally either evade or, more often, slay his pursuers. The string of Malgar's victories made him a prominent figure with the Blackwood Brigand Lords, so prominent in fact that more than one of them started scheming against him. However, it was none of them, but a young Frost Valley lore master by the name of Ralphors that finally managed to take him down. Leading a group of shield-bearers, he found one of Malgar's treasure hoards, and knowing that the Brigand Chief would visit them only alone, he set a trap that finally ended Malgar's scourge. The Abomination. The victory was short-lived. A little over a year later, reports came in of an abominable beast wreaking havoc on a territory Malgar had used to consider his own before his demise. Shortly after, it turned out that it was Malgar himself, brought back from the dead by the mists, and transformed into an abomination that seemed to have focused all his cruelty, his malice, and his insatiable hunger for blood. Having murdered all of his past subordinates and demonstrated a rage capable of destruction that would impress even the most miscrazed of the Goran warriors, Malgar went on a further killing spree throughout the land under the protection of Frost Valley Keep. Now, surrounded by a herd of undead, some of them his own companions he'd killed, others merely his victims, he prepares to strike a mighty blow against Frost Valley Keep. From a handful of notes left by Ralphars after his sudden departure, it seems that the former chief's treasure hoards might contain powerful artifacts or at least answers that may help whoever faces Malgar in defeating him once and for all. However, an ominous side note also mentions a strange ritual that may have not only been responsible for bringing Malgar back, but might also imbue him with even more strength should he be opposed in battle. Ralphor's Wingmere. Ralphor's was born as a second son to Baroness Wingmere, a moderately wealthy but also extremely ambitious merchant operating southwest of Frost Valley Keep. In order to elevate the position of the House of Wingmere, Ralphor's father sent him to the Shieldbearers' headquarters to become an apprentice of Hakernan the Sage, one of the most esteemed lore masters in the northern kingdoms, and a personal advisor to the Keep's Lord Commander. After a few years of privileged life of a teenage son to a wealthy father, Ralphor's found himself in a new and slightly less comfortable situation. But he wasn't anything if adaptable, and although he lacked the discipline usually associated with the scholarly and rigid lore masters, he quickly impressed his new master and teacher with his perceptiveness, the keenness of his senses, and his bright and inquisitive mind. He also made friends among the Shieldbearers as he started making use of his new healing skills the moment he mastered them, not only being always ready to help but those who would come back wounded from their patrols, but also expressing his eagerness to join them on their missions. Hikinen, not without initial trepidations, finally gave in, allowing his young student to become a part of a few expeditions into the borderlands, where Ralphor's skills seemed especially useful. The Shieldbearers, prone to fall to poisonous blades and magical ailments, quickly found out what a tremendous asset young Ralphor's really was. Hikinen's apprentice thus became invaluable, and those of the Shieldbearers he had saved from death or grievous harm would become his friends, openly asking him to join them on their next patrol. With his master's approval, Ralphor's would join them more and more often, in time becoming their guide, as the ways he would be able to find usually allowed them to avoid ambushes, and often turn the tables on the enemies of Frost Valley Keep. Nobody questioned Ralphor's skills and unique talents, knowing that in these dark times, any blessings of the Dawn Mother should be accepted without any doubts. The young sage was now more than just a companion or a lucky charm. He would initiate some of the patrols, claiming to have found new evidence during the previous excursions. He would investigate runes or strange constructs the Shieldbearers would usually encounter when led by him, and he would lead them to yet another crushing victory over a band of brigands, a coven of sorcerers, or a herd of the undead. Ralphor's the Waychanger. Even Hirkinen and the Lord Commander finally acknowledged his talent, Hirkinen granting him the official title of a lore master, and the Lord Commander allowing Ralphor's to officially plan some of the patrol routes. Impressed with his uncanny ability to decipher enemy movements from the smallest clues, the Shieldbearers started following his orders without question, until Ralphor's was finally included in the yearly expedition to Ravencrag, where he would travel to as a member of the Lord Commander's personal guard. After arriving at Ravencrag, Ralphor's finally revealed his true nature. Nobody knows when the mist managed to reach him, but only moments after the new Ravencrag Jarl was chosen, Ralphor's called upon the power of the mists. Flocks of fell hunters suddenly fell from the sky to attack the furries and the Shieldbearers, and Ralphor's himself made his way to the new Jarl, suddenly changing before the man's very eyes. His hands transformed to a vicious claw, struck at two unsuspecting Shieldbearers, the corrupting touch making their armor blacken and crumple like parchment set on fire. Leathery wings suddenly emerging from the lore master's back took him into the air for but a blink of an eye, but long enough to make the strike against the Jarl a deadly one, and leaving Ravencrag without a leader for the first time in centuries. Through shrieks of fellstalkers and the roar of the mists, Ralphor's laugh was shivering cruelty and took to the sky, this time planning to destroy the Lord Commander of Frost Valley Keep. Yet, moments before Ralphor swooped down upon his prey, a wall of ice appeared between him and the Lord Commander, giving the warriors of Frost Valley and Ravencrag an opportunity to finally regroup. Taking a last look at the Del Diarl, the former Lore Master decided to fall back into the mists, hesitating for only the moment needed to remember the face of the Frost Mage that stood in his way. The Flamecaster Mage. Sigrid was one of the youngest students admitted to the Daphnafar Lore Forge after she was freed from a group of slavers that had burned her village and killed her family. A Flamecaster Mage that accompanied the group of mist hunters that saved her immediately felt her great potential and even escorted her personally to Daphnafar in order to make sure that Sigrid would be well cared for, as her talent had already started to manifest in dangerous ways. Because of her young age and exceptional ability, Sigrid was immediately taken under the wing of Thaela, the headmistress of the Flamecasters, who would, from now on, oversee the girl's education personally, as she had also recognized the power of the fire burning within young Sigrid. However, what was meant as means of protecting the young apprentice turned out to be the same thing that put her in harm's way. Arkin Stedholm, head of one of the most powerful great houses of Daphnafar, took Thaela's decision as a personal insult, since the headmistress had refused his firstborn son, also a student of the Lore Forge, the privilege of becoming her personal apprentice. Thaela made a little of the powerful nobleman's threats, and as Arkin's initial outrage seemed to die down after a few months, proceeded to train young Sigrid. The girl's talent and discipline was constantly impressing her, and Sigrid's eagerness to help her fellow students made the girl many friends in the ranks of the apprentice Flamecasters. All seemed well until the time of Sigrid's final test, which turned out to be the moment Arkin Stedholm had waited for patiently. The mighty nobleman used his influence to bribe or threaten two of the masters that took part in the test, making it not only impossible but also mortally dangerous for Sigrid. And only during the rite Thaela found out that something was wrong, but her intervention quickly turned into a tragedy, as the headmistress herself fell victim to the trap. They unleashed an uncontrollable raw magic energy, tearing her apart before her young apprentice's eyes. Some of the guilty were found. Part of the truth came into the light, but it was already too late for Sigrid. Traumatized and seemingly broken, she slipped out of Daphnafar, knowing that Arkin Stedholm, the true perpetrator of the murder of the person Sigrid had been closest with, managed to evade punishment. Sigrid's initial intention was to travel north to fight the beastmen and brigands on her own, resolving to destroy at least the enemies she would be able to reach and eventually fall in battle, consumed by her own magic power. But she was met with something she did not expect. After destroying a band of beastmen, she was suddenly touched by a power unlike any she had experienced before. Filled with the same rage and fire, an overwhelming sense of being unjustly punished and discarded. The strange entity seemed to understand Sigrid's more than any human being ever did. And as the young Flamecaster opened her mind to the presence, she was overtaken by a need to cleanse the world with smoldering flames and turn it into ash that would become one with her new source of power. Empowered by the mists, Sigrid first ravaged the lands on her own, but then returned to Daphnafar to take vengeance on Arkin Stedholm. Within one night she burned his house, his family, and himself to ashes, and proceeded to find and kill his Flamecaster son. On her way she faced many of her former brothers and sisters, some of who would oppose her and die, and others who would join her, seeing the power she now wielded. And only after being countered by the might of the Lower Forge's High Council, Sigrid yielded and fled back to the north, leading a renegade force of flamecasters and vowing to one day find and burn the last living member of the Stedholm house, Arkin's younger son, who managed to elude her vengeance. Eridai the Hunter. Some villains are born when a champion falls, or when a misguided individual finds nobody able to point him in the right direction before it gets too late to counter the consequences of their actions. Some are born weak, and they seek strength among those who are most eager to show off their power. None of this was ever true for Eridai. Even as a boy, always taller and stronger than his peers, Eridai would exploit every opportunity to bend others to his will. Over the years of his childhood, he perfected the art of bullying, and reveled in the hatred and fear other children would feel towards him. And since Valkyrian parents usually believed that their offspring should fight their own battles, he had never been stopped until it was too late. Although hard to believe, all that changed for even worse when Eridai accompanied his father into the woods to hunt with him for the first time. Exhilarated and filled with bloodlust, he could not stop thinking about taking another life, and soon he would. The hunt became everything for Eridai. The fear of his victims would make Eridai's blood boil with pleasure, and he soon started to spend more time in the wilds than in his home village. He hunted for the thrill, often flaying prey and leaving it otherwise untouched, for an entity that appeared in his thoughts as sacrifice. And after his final and bloodiest sacrifice had been accepted, he became what he is today. Tall as a giant, but gaunt and grim, Eridai still bends the will of the creatures of the wilds. Wielding a gift bestowed by the mists, he makes even Beastmen and Ravenok bow to him as he leads them into bloody hunt. His petrifying cry, one that Eridai unleashes only moments before making the kill, haunts the wildness from Nahar to Vaskir. Atharak the Undying. Once a powerful master of the arcane arts, Atharak feared nothing but the passage of time, drawing his fill from the wells of both light and dark energies. He would seek the key to unlock the secret of immortality until his obsessive research bore grim fruit. For decades, known as a somewhat puzzling figure, sometimes ready to lend a hand to the inhabitants of Nar, but never without naming a price for his aid, Atharak became an almost forgotten recluse in his old age. Many even thought that he died before he made a return back into the lands of the living. Calling forth power never before seen in the world, Atharak caused a magical cataclysm that blotted out the sun and made the dead rise up from the ground. Having struck a deal with a dark power that touched his mind, now ravaged by insanity, Atharak performed a ritual that would transform his body, as well as the land surrounding his dwelling. Hence, the first true dragon was born. Seemingly immortal and drunk with power, Atharak raised an undead army, ready to forge an eternal kingdom of his own. Before he marched on Hammerholm, however, he was found by a Myrmidon captain by the name of Alekar and struck down after a long and exhausting battle. And though it seemed like his reign of terror had ended before it even started, the dark power did not release its grip on the dragon. Revealing itself for the first time as the mists, it raised Atharak, fusing his will with the skeletal body of the creature he had become. Believed to be a legend for 100 years, Atharak has now returned in his terrifying form, leading a massive army of undead ready to deal a crushing blow to the lands of the living. Kesra the Dreaming. Many new threats have emerged from the mist since the Battle of Ravencrag and the cataclysm that tore the world apart. Some of them are merely a tale spawned by terrified minds of those who came into contact with the mists. Others turn out to be painfully true. Nobody really knows who she is, but they call her Kesra, which means Mother of Nightmares in the language of the Karathi. Wherever she appears, eyes always closed and hands dripping with blood. The land seems to freeze, as if suspended in a perpetual dream, with no day coming after the night. Those who stay there lose the ability to sleep. Tired and tormented, they fall prey to demonic creatures that seem to walk in Kesra's path. Those who survived this raids also speak of another strange phenomenon. Barely audible sounds of battle carried by the last gusts of wind. And within those sounds, a female voice shouts the Myrmidon battle cry and calls those fighting beside her not to surrender, just before an ominous silence falls upon the land. The Keeper. The Keeper is a partly mythical being, and up until his recent reappearance, many believed him to be no more than a folktale. Described as a giant skeletal figure wielding a sword, the Keeper was thought by many to be a godlike being, or a personification of neutrality and judgment. The truth is, however, more complex. Once a warrior and an explorer, the Keeper's name has been forever lost in the tides of time. What some of the most ancient ambiguous texts tell of him today is that he was a man determined to find out the true nature of the mists, so that their threat could be dealt with forever. Yet, as he explored further and deeper into the lands taken by the malevolent force, both his mind and his body did not remain untouched, as the mists can find a way to unlock the door, barring the way into the mind of even the strongest individuals. All they need is time. Some believe that the Keeper became what he is now a punishment for his unparalleled hunger for knowledge. Others believe that it was his relentlessness in achieving his goal that brought him too far. Most scholars agree, however, that he did eventually find the knowledge he had been seeking, but that the journey itself consumed him in the process. Headstrong and unyielding, the Keeper was none the less transformed, the mist twisting, allowing him to witness what their great secret was, while binding him to it and making him a guardian of what he so much craved for. However, as he still retains part of his former self, the Keeper still partly resists the corrupting power, hanging on to what is left in his mind of his original purpose. Now, having gathered enough energy to breach back into the lands of men, the Keeper awaits the heroes able to best him, so that the secrets that lie beyond the Black Gate can be revealed. And while the power of the mists holds enough sway over his current form to make him stand against whoever wishes to walk through the door of the heart of the mists, his appearance may be humanity's greatest chance of winning back the world half devoured by what seems like inobservable and unrelenting darkness. Velkar the Devourer. The story of Velkar almost mirrors that of the Keeper. Similarly, little is known about him, as he was once a man whose hunger for knowledge and power was only matched by his desire to remain unnoticed by those who could foil his plans. Believed to have been a dusk-bearer priest once, he has since left the shadowy path of the Nightfather to step into the black madness of the mists, embracing their gifts willingly, wholeheartedly, and deliberately. Melded with the darkest energies emanating the power of the mists, Velkar has become one with the mists, becoming the only living being to fully aware of the oldest and darkest chapter of their history. Once proud children of the dawn and dusk, and struck down by their father's fiery rage, the firstborn were not annihilated. Their suffering and anger remained in the ashes of their violent demise. The firstborn souls melded together, giving birth to the corrupting power known as the mists. Their torment and lust for vengeance, fueled by the divine might that destroyed them, became the power able to sow destruction and corrupt everything in its path. Reaching the gorge, a cursed place where Nightfaller's hand had struck the world to annihilate his children, Valkar is an unspeakable malevolent abomination and the source of the corrupting power of the mists. The will of the firstborn is now his will, and he grows in power. The day the world will die, tormented the way the first children of the gods died, seems closer than ever before.